coming to our Symposia series. Today, the topic is surveys and using surveys effectively. A lot of us are using surveys as our data collection tool, and we're here to talk to you about ways that you can improve current surveys and make them more useful for creating improvement strategies. Susie, can you go to the next one? Thank you. So, about us, we are the institutional effectiveness team. We are here to support the institution, both faculty and staff, in promoting the effective use of surveys and other tools to measure your outcomes. And that's why we're presenting on these different topics. So we are here to help you as a resource. And I am Catherine Perez. I'm the Senior Director of Institutional Effectiveness. And with us here is Aileen Sanabria, the Associate Director, Susie Lieben as the Manager, and then our coordinators, Leo and Zen, and our graduate assistants, William and Jillian. And we also have Sarah.
And
Sarah, our newest member. Sorry for leaving you out. I'm just so used to our routine, but now we have the newest member, our data analyst, Sarah. And she's fantastic, and she'll be helping us move towards a more data-rich team, promoting that across the university as well for all of the assessment efforts we do. So next, the agenda for today's session. Our team will be discussing about the assessment tool, the assessment tool, which is surveys in this case, and why and when to use them, when it's appropriate, tips on developing survey items, and developing survey items that are useful for improvement strategies. Survey data analysis is the last component, and this is the most important part. What do you do with the data once you get it, and how to analyze it to make it significant for your purposes? And so that's pretty much what we have scheduled. We also will have time for questions. We are recording the session so that you will be able to get a link to the recording after the presentation is done. And you will also have access to the PowerPoint presentation.
And if you have any questions during the presentation, you can use the chat box. We'll be monitoring the chat box, and we'll be able to answer any questions you have. And feel free to share. We have a stop point in the presentation where we'd like to have an open discussion and share a little bit about what we're all doing.
So, So surveys as assessment tools, quality assessment practices are the cornerstone to continuous improvement. Assessment methods should be designed with intention of gathering data needed to inform decisions related to outcome attainment. Choosing the right tool is essential to effectively assessing an outcome or question you are trying to answer. So as Kathy mentioned, today's PowerPoint is about surveys. So a quick definition of a survey is a method of gathering information using relevant questions from a sample of people with the aim of understanding populations as a whole. Surveys provide critical source of data and insights for everyone engaged in information, academics, advising, all of us. Next slide. Thank you. All right, surveys as an assessment tool, identify assessment needs. What are you trying to measure or understand? So for example, we're just gonna go with advising. So for advising, we're trying to improve student satisfaction of advising. So we're trying to see if students are satisfied with the current advising that they're getting. So that's the goal. That's what we're trying to understand. Moving on, so this is the next step. So the match surveys with a purpose. What survey questions would best measure the outcome of attainment? So again, going back, we are advising. We're trying to see if students are satisfied with the advising that they're currently with what they're currently getting. So we might ask them an open-ended question. such as how well do you feel you were satisfied with the advising you received? Were you satisfied with the advising session you got? Do you feel that the advising session you received helped improve what classes you want to take for the fall, etc.? Again, we're trying to choose survey questions that would best measure the outcome attainment. Asking them how do they feel about their major doesn't measure, again, what we're trying to, which is, again, we're trying to measure whether students were satisfied with their advising. So again, you have to make sure that you have to make sure that the outcome that you're measuring the outcome attainment. Moving on to the set of standards for use, the when and where will the survey be used? Again, we're advising. So the when is going to be, students are going to get the survey question after their advising session. The where, the students are going to be emailed the survey questions after their session. And who will be responsible for implementing its use? The people that will be responsible for implementing its use in this example will be the Office of Advising, and they're going to take the data from the survey and use it to inform their decisions later on. Again, since the goal is trying to improve student satisfaction of advising, they're going to take that data from the survey to improve.
And if I may add, Susie, can you go back for a second, William? I wanted to add something. So when you're identifying the assessment needs, going with William's example of advising, how satisfied students are with advising, you need to think about all of the components that make up your overarching goal of student satisfaction with advising. Once you have all of those components, so how easy is it for students to get an appointment with an advisor? What is the quality of the advising that students are getting in terms of the electives that they should be getting, depending on their major, in terms of the prerequisites that they need to be getting? So those are all different components of the advising that happens for our students. So when you're identifying the assessment need, yes, you're looking at advising, but you have to see all of the different sub areas that make up the whole advising. And then once you develop your questions, you have to make sure that your questions are targeted towards all of the different components that make up advising. Because if you just ask students, how satisfied are you with advising? And they say, well, I'm really satisfied, or I'm very dissatisfied, or I'm like halfway satisfied. You're not really getting any meaningful information in terms of what is it within their whole entire advising experience that needs to be improved, or that we're already doing really well and students are very satisfied with. Because there's a lot of different components that make up that whole advising experience. So identifying that need and matching the purpose, you have to think about all of the different smaller components that make up that overarching goal of you want students to have a good advising experience and be satisfied with it. Go ahead, William.
Thank you. Excellent. Okay. So quantitative versus qualitative, and then also mixed methods, both are equally valid in their own way and are both really useful in collecting data and analyzing data. So quantitative is closed-ended questions or measures capturing numeric data. So for example, let's pretend that we're going to be English 101. For example, a question that could be used for quantitative could be, who's the villain in the Odyssey? It would be a multiple choice question. There is an actual answer. It's like, again, with quantitative, it's facts. Qualitative is more quantitative is more ideas and concepts, and it's more subjective, and explores the people's perceptions and feelings and ideas. So again, with quantitative, a question that could be used would be, who's the villain of the Odyssey? And they would pick from a multiple choice, and there is a correct answer. With qualitative, it would be an open-ended question, which could be a text box where, again, the professor asks them, what was Homer's message in the Odyssey? So it's exploring the students' feelings and perceptions. Qualitative could be really good for critical thinking and things like that. Again, trying to analyze and see what the students were able to pull from something, where again, qualitative is more cold, hard facts, and it's the definitive. both are equally valid in their own point. And again, that's where we're going with mixed methods, where it combines different forms of data, and it combines both open and closed-ended questions, and it gives a more holistic review of the data. And it's able to give you a better picture of where the students are at in terms of everything.
I would also like to add, thank you, William, about the ability for quantitative and qualitative questions to be integrated into one survey and supplement one another. So for example, if you want to ask closed-ended questions that will give you quick numbers about something, but might not give you the how or why, you might want to supplement those multiple choice kind of Likert scale items with an open-ended question that will ask more details. And that way, if you know that, for example, going back to the advising example, if you know that your students are very satisfied with access to their advisor, but not very satisfied with the ability to schedule the right courses at the right time for their graduation, then you can target only those students that had the unsatisfied thing, and see if any of the open-ended questions that you might have used might answer the why question. So you could see, okay, students who were unsatisfied, why were they unsatisfied? And they could have given more complete answers as to specific examples of why they felt that way.
Okay, thank you, Cassie. Thank you, Williams. Thank you, Eileen, for your presentation so far. And in the next session, we're going to talk about surveys in context. So while the use of surveys comes in very different, many different shapes and forms, surveys are used slightly differently between the context of academic and also the context of administrative assessments. Academic assessment facilitates student success and measures their extent of their learning. In this context, surveys are used to gather student perceptions of learning or professors teaching. Some of the examples of academic surveys are used includes gathering student perceptions of learning, professors teaching, or students' perception of their ability to complete a certain task. This will be also known as self-efficacy. This term, this construct, and also student perception of their program and department. In the administrative assessment, it encompasses the organizational efficiency and productivity or satisfaction of a particular program or a particular center. So in this context, we tend to measure things like customer satisfaction with the service or experience, student user experience with service received, employees satisfaction, employees perceptions of new or old tools, systems, etc. And next slide, please. So in this section, we're going to do a small interactive activity with our audience. We'd like to invite all of our audience to share some of the thoughts in the chat box about your experiences using a survey, collecting data for your program improvement. So you can, share your experiences in the chat box down below on the Zoom about some of the good and bad and the nuances of those experiences you had with using surveys. We'll give you probably about a minute to wait for the results to come in, or you can unmute, as Susie said, and speak. And we welcome any responses. Thank you. And we're just gonna wait here for a second.
You could share any challenges you've had with using surveys.
That's right.
Yeah, Christina, you use surveys a lot, definitely.
And how do you use it for your decision making?
Hi, Dr. Perez. So we pretty much gather as a team and have these accreditation meetings where we show the results that we received and we make decisions based off of those results because it's what the students are asking for.
Mm-hmm.
So we pretty much, we meet and then we decide what's the best route to take, but it's primarily based off the data.
Fantastic. And do you find that all of the questions from your survey serve a purpose for improvement, or do you find that some questions might be, what kinds of questions do you find more useful for developing your improvements? I guess is what I'm trying to ask you.
So we find that keeping it rather short and sweet is the best approach to capture our students' attention and engagement. So as long as we keep it short and to the point, we've gotten really good feedback. When we've had lengthier surveys, we get some more resistance into students completing it. So we find it best to just keep it short, sweet. I think 7 questions is probably the longest that we've been using recently.
That's fantastic. Thank you. That's
You're
a lot of information, valuable.
David also put in the chat that he uses surveys as a baseline at the beginning of the semester to understand the technical abilities of the students. So that's as a baseline, is to guide instruction for the rest of the semester, which is perfect. So survey is not just to get student perceptions. You can also use the survey to guide instruction in terms of what they already know as a baseline. Joan said, I have a future emphasis survey for the members of my didactic program, which includes students, staff, faculty, and community liaisons. So where it is they're gonna go, that's perfect. Dr. Gooden, I'm planning to use surveys to assess if we're meeting our learning goals and outcomes. We've introduced short 1 or 2-minute surveys. Short is good, like Christina was saying, that assess programs or initiatives. And some are open-ended while others are more Likert scale. So you've got that mixed methods going on there, which is great to get some more of that qualitative aspect that you don't get on a 1 to 5 scale. Okay, good. Anyone else wants to jump in?
And part of what UNA uses that for in housing and res life is that they use that to discuss whether they need to restructure or modify their residential curriculum. And that's something that's really helpful to understand the student experience. We have a lot of students living in housing, and that's one side of how administrators use surveys to understand needs, perceptions, and to make those decisions for those for the benefit of the students.
And that's a very
And for us too.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because even areas that are considered administrative can have learning goals for students that they serve.
Definitely.
And can use questions to determine whether students attain those goals that they have. Self-efficacy, like Zen was saying, is one of the best uses that we found to be able to measure student perceptions of their own learning. And it allows you to see, also if you have direct measures and you have self-efficacy measures, which are kind of like perception measures of learning, you can compare the two. And sometimes you see that they contradict one another. Sometimes students feel that they're doing great in writing and that they're experts in writing. They feel that the program has allowed them to learn a lot in writing. But then when you look at the direct assessment, their actual papers, those don't coincide. They might have weaknesses in certain areas. So it's interesting to see that. And sometimes it happens the opposite. Students feel that they don't get enough information about a certain competency, and then yet they're testing well. So you wouldn't be able to capture that from the actual direct measures that you would be assessing otherwise.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for all of your responses. Clearly, there's a lot of different ways you can use surveys to help us to improve our assessment practices, and also in your own practices as well. So in the next section, we're going to be talking about the different advantages and different disadvantages of using surveys. So the first one, the clear advantage of using surveys, easy and easy to create, easy to administer through various online platforms. In our university community, faculties and students are entitled to use Qualtrics accounts. It's a great tool for us to leverage for free. In our case, we can use it to administer to students or to faculty to understand some of our students' experiences or faculty's experience. And it's also tied into the number two advantage, which is it's relatively cheap and cost effective. In our case, it's totally free. So in the third advantage, it allows you to collect a broad range of data, including both quantitative and qualitative data. And it's also easy to gain insights using descriptive statistics. Qualtrics actually automatically analyze your results and then give you options to export some of this data for additional analysis. You can use some of your own liking statistical packages such as SPSS to export the data from Qualtrics and conduct your own sort of experiments and also analysis. And which is tied into the number fifth advantage, which is it's easy to determine reliability and validity and also statistical significance. And also, while the advantages of using a survey is pretty clear and apparent, disadvantages is also pretty prominent. The first disadvantage is that low response rates can be very problematic. Low response rate can increase the potential errors that coming up from your survey, and also it can be underrepresenting some of the population that you're trying to collect, trying to understand. And longer surveys can lead to survey fatigue. It can also cause their attention to responses and input to labs, and which leads to poorly gathered information and also a longer, maybe a potential higher rates of non-completion. So responses option. So for the third disadvantage, response option can be inflexible. That means sometimes we can have only multiple choice questions set in our surveys, and those type of answers does not give us details into understanding some of our experiences of our student. And closed-ended questions may lack depth, which is also tied into what I just said. Students may not feel comfortable providing unfavorable responses, and this really also related to a concept called response bias. Is that students can answer the questions untruthfully due to various conditions and biases that influence their decision of answering the questions correctly. Next slide, please.
Sorry, hold on. There we go.
All right, so next section, we're going to talk about developing item questions. So the first tip we want to consider in developing item questions, consider what you're trying to measure. So in our case, we want to be very specific, very precise about the information you need to gather. This will not only simplify your data collection process, but also potentially help you to align your question with the purpose of assessment and also reduce your errors as well. And second tip is to make it simple and straightforward as possible to ensure students and target populations can answer to the best of their abilities. And this is tied with the response bias, is making it simple and straightforward as possible, making the questions simple and straightforward as possible will reduce the potential response bias from the students and will make the students easier to understand the questions correctly. And the third tip is to make sure it aligns with the selected category. Next slide, please. So there are main two question types. The first ones are close-ended questions, and those are the questions like what you do is Likert rating scales and multiple choices questions and yes or no. Those are definitive answers that you can choose from for a survey. They tend to be more objective, conclusive, and it's easier to measure and analyze those results. And they generate a quantitative data. For the second type, which is open-ended questions, they usually require more times for the respondent to answer, and it takes longer for them to analyze and measure, is mainly due to that. It is mainly due to the flexibility of those questions that gives to students to answer elaboratively into their responses. It tend to generate qualitative data and allows respondent to give more personal responses. Some of the examples includes text box or the comments section you can put after the multiple choice questions, after the certain question, and to elaborate certain context of what the students put for their either Likert rating scale or multiple choices answer. Yeah, so that's all for me. Thank you.
There is one thing that I want to share before we move on to the next section about data analysis. Let me do a new share. Hold on. I have a resource that I would like to share. Just trying to reshare the screen. So I'll send this to everybody along with the slides when we're done. But this is a great resource for choosing those Likert scale response options, because sometimes people inappropriately choose a Likert scale that doesn't match the question they're trying to ask. And this kind of looks out, it gets to the measure that you're trying to understand, and then the a possible list of choices that can be for your Likert scale. And you can modify these or use them as you want. We find that 5 is a good number, or even 4 or 5. Sometimes the main problem with a 5-point scale is that neutral option sometimes becomes a catch-all category. And then people, if they don't know what to say, they kind of tend to select that neutral option. But it is sometimes helpful to have it based on what you're trying to understand. But I will share this because it is helpful to see these different types of options based off of these different factors. If you're looking for good or bad, how much they utilization rates, the likelihood of something happening, difficulty, comparison options. So it has a lot of good scales. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you, Susie. That's a great example of a resource for Likert scales. Also, if you do use Qualtrics, they also have example Likert scales that you can pick from, and it'll self-modify depending on how many Likert scale points you have. So like if you, but you have to on the left-hand side, and we could help anyone develop a Qualtrics survey, by the way, if you want to. So on the left-hand side, when you're developing your multiple choice scale, you will need to select, so it's like a little dial that says that you allow for suggested Likert scale items. And those suggested Likert scale items do include different scales like what Susie showed. I find that the handout is easier because I find it easier to scroll through than on the online platform. But yes, they do have auto scales in Qualtrics as well.
And one more point before we move on. When you're selecting your Likert scale, think about the user and what you're really trying to get at. Sometimes the difference, like if you're like in a 7-point Likert scale, sometimes the difference between a 6 and a 7 is really hard to determine because sometimes they're so close together. So you have to think about the range of your scale and to make sure that it's appropriate for what you're trying to understand. Are you trying to get like a feel for positive or negative, or do you want to get something super detailed? And sometimes when you get into that super detailed, a higher range scale, it's really hard to for the user, the respondent, to differentiate between those nuances between the levels. So just make sure when you use it that it's appropriate, and think about it from your user's point of view, and how, let's say, if you're a student or you're a faculty member taking a survey, what makes most sense to the survey taker? Because they're the ones who are going to be giving you that data, and they're the ones who are going to be responding. And you really want to think about it from the user's perspective rather than the question asker's perspective. That's all I wanted to say.
All right, so now that you've identified the purpose of your survey, then develop the questions that you're going to use for your survey, whether open-ended or closed-ended, depending on what your purpose is. You need to look at what kind of analysis, what kind of data analysis are you going to run to see whether you're actually achieving those outcomes that you developed the survey for. So if you're using quantitative data, some of the analysis that you can make, you can do descriptive statistics, get your mean, your median, your mode, and get a feel for how it is that students are answering. You can do a t-test if you're doing a pre and post post design. You can do an ANOVA if you want to look at the differences among means for different survey items. You can do a chi-square if you want to look at whether a survey item is statistically significant or not. And the one that I like the most, you can definitely use the other ones, but factor analysis is really good because it helps you clean out your questions. It tells you how much weight each question carries for within the survey, and it helps you clean up the questions within your survey so that you're not asking questions that are not really generating significant data. If you're doing qualitative questions, or even if you're doing mixed methods, you would do some of the quantitative analyses, and then you would do the qualitative analyses for your open-ended responses. You could do what we all know, which is your theme analysis. You can use NVivo, Atlas TI, to analyze the text that the students, what the students actually wrote in terms of their responses. You could do sentiment analysis, looking at if there's any feelings behind the responses. And also one that's being used a lot now, and I think Sarah's going to talk a little bit about later about it more, is a word cloud. So showing what words were most used by the students in their responses of the in their qualitative, in their open-ended questions. And like Kathy said, we can help you develop your surveys in Qualtrics, whether open-ended or closed-ended, and we can help you get started with that data analysis piece so that you can see how meaningful your questions are and what you're doing is. We can definitely help you set all of that up. Now, if you have data that is quantitative, there's two ways of reporting it. You can report your results either as an aggregate, or what we like the most and what's most useful to drive your improvement and to show as proof for your improvement actions is disaggregated results. So for aggregated results, you're just compiling and summarizing your data. We assessed 20 students. 20 students actually responded to the survey, and the average score was 3.8 out of 5 because you were using a 5-point Likert scale, and all of the 20 students rated their program satisfaction above the minimum score of 3 because you wanted all students to rate their satisfaction with the program at 3 or above. That's aggregated. Now, if you think back at the advising example that I gave earlier, program satisfaction, there's so many components that make up whether students are satisfied with the program or not, that unless you disaggregate those results and the questions, it's not just the results, you're not going to be able to disaggregate the results unless your questions are broken down into the different components that make up your overarching goal. You need to disaggregate that data first in your questions so you can get the data, and then in your results to really look at where it is that you are excelling and where it is that you have areas for growth. So if we were to report disaggregated results, because our questions ask them disaggregated, if you just ask for program satisfaction, it's going to be hard for you to do that unless you have open-ended questions that follow how satisfied are you with the program, and then the students answer in terms of different aspects of the program that they're dissatisfied with. But let's say you're doing your quantitative data, and then you have teaching quality, advising, preparation for industry, course availability, and research opportunities. So you're still saying how many students completed the survey because you need that context. You're still saying what the overall average across the survey was, that 3.8 out of 5. How many of the students actually met your goal from their responses? How many rated it at 3 or above? And then you're going down and disaggregating into each of the areas. Now, when you look at this, you see advising is the lowest one, right, followed by course availability. So if I were a faculty member or a chair in this particular program, I would target advising and course availability. Now, again, having that mixed methods part, and Kathy's gonna love me because she's really mixed methods. Having that mixed methods part will really help you with, okay, this is what we got in terms of advising and course availability. And then here in the open-ended questions, they're telling us that they cannot get an appointment with their advisor, or that the advisor doesn't know what electives they need to take. Course availability, they want more evening courses, or they want more morning courses, or more Friday courses, which you're not gonna get from just asking them, how satisfied are you with course availability on a 1 to 5 scale. So that definitely you should have that to get an overall feeling for how students are for student perceptions in these areas. But that open-ended questions open up to the specifics of what each student actually needs to excel in your program and to move along in your program. Any questions? Okay, I think Sarah is up next.
Okay. In previous slide, we learned how to develop questions, collect data, analyze data. Now is the moment to convert the information in something easy to understand. And the key word is data visualization. So why do we use data visualization? First, to make sure that the findings are clear, to show areas for improvement, and to provide recommendation. So these are some general rules. First of all, is keep it simple. Usually people overcomplicate charts, graphs, and data, making them hard to understand. The main reason to visualize data is to get the point across. So for example, if student GPA increased in the last few years, it will make sense to show how the student GPA increased during this year with a line chart, avoiding other relevant information if we are not interested in studying other factors. So keep each data visualization clear and simple. The second one is think about your end goal. So pick the best way to visualize your data. It's like picking the best outfit for your occasion. So you can go in an elegant dress and high heels to hiking. And for the same reason, you can pick a pie chart if you want to analyze a trend. You got to ensure your visualization is fit to the purpose, keep your audience in mind, and remember if you have one clear message that you want to highlight in the graph. The third one is focus on data, design, and feel. First of all, data should be accurate. Make sure that your story matches up with what you're trying to show. If there is any discrepancy, you have done something wrong and you have to correct them. After, you can start to make a pretty picture and create some graphic. And think if the chart is clear and if it tells the story most effectively without too much clutter. Next slide. Thank you. And there are many types of visualization. Today, we will talk about the most common used in surveys. This is a little summary of what kind of visualization we will talk about today. The first one is the line chart. Next slide. It can be single or stacked line. Sometimes it's also called a multiple line chart. We use line chart if you want to see how a variable or multiple variable change over time. For example, on the left, we can see how the enrollment of a school change over time. It isn't a FIO, so don't worry about the decrease of enrollment. And instead, on the right, we can see an example of stacked line chart. It is used if we want to compare multiple variables that change over time. And we can see how the number of self-reported COVID-19 cases changed during fall 2020. Next slide. The second type is the bar chart. It can be vertical, horizontal, grouped, or stacked. This kind of chart is used to compare changing variable or different categories. For example, gender distribution, or if you want to see if the training was effective or not, and you want to compare the pre and post data. Usually, I prefer the group chart, that is the chart on the right, because it was most effective and is more clear. And you can see immediately see the difference between the categories. Instead, in the graph on the left, the second category only starts when the first one ends, and so on. So it's more confusing. Next slide. The third one is the pie chart or donut chart. It is used when the data you are presenting as partial and whole result. It is usually used when you have a maximum of 5 categories to display, not more. In fact, as you can see, the chart on the left is confusing because it has more than 5 categories. In that case, it will be better to use like a bar chart. The same rule applies also to the donuts chart. Next slide. The last one is the word cloud. If you have like qualitative data and you want to find a way to visualize it, you can use the word cloud. It highlights common word in response, so you can see the theme arises. This is an example of a word cloud for a university website. And as you can see, the most common words used by the website are university, education, college, learning, academic, and etc. And you can do also with Word, adding like an add-on. So it's really easy. Next slide, and now I will leave Susie with.
Okay, so all of this goes into your stakeholders. You're collecting data, you're trying to understand trends, understand needs, understand perceptions or your basically your outcomes. But none of that is of use if you're not also sharing it with your stakeholders. We need to share what we're doing. And part of that is when you're making your visualizations, like Sarah said, think about your audience. And like I said, with the Likert scales, think about who you're trying to convey this information to, who you're trying to gather this information from. And when you share that information, when you're thinking of your audience, for example, if you're sharing with a VP or the president of the university or the provost, maybe an executive summary will be the best means to share that information. If you're trying to target students and promote a program and you want to talk about, if you come to this advising program or come to this career and talent development session on resume writing, 90% of our career and talent clients get job interviews after getting their resume revised by a career advisor. Maybe that's something you want to promote on social media. Maybe students are not reading newsletters, but they do engage in social media. And so if you have those TikTok, Instagram, social media channels that our students are using mostly, they'll be able to engage with that content more, and you'll be able to get the points across better depending on your audience. Internally, maybe you have a team debriefing. You want to share that survey data with your team internally and discuss it. Talk about how you're going to use that data to make the improvements, because all of this in the end is about driving those continuous improvement efforts for the university for the benefit of what we do, making our programs more effective, making our processes more effective, and bettering our student success, improving our student experience. Like Dr. Gooden was saying, in housing and residential life, they want to streamline and revise, maybe make changes or modifications to their residential curriculum. They can't make those changes without knowing what the students need. And in order to get to what the students need to have the surveys. We need to survey our students and to understand really where they're coming from and what their unique needs are. So a little more tips on developing surveys. We also want to, for students, colorful and visual data is helpful. They don't want to read a report. They want to just look at an infographic and see the information that you're trying to get at them, and it should be clear and understandable, not overly complex. That's something that's great tips for visualizations, like Sarah was saying. So some tips for developing surveys, just an overview of and some takeaways from what we talked about today, is that every question should really inform an improvement. And if you break it down into these constructs like self-efficacy when you're trying to understand perceptions of learning, or if you're trying to understand perceptions of service, break it down into those elements of service that you're trying to understand. Because if you just ask one general question, if it's too broad, you're not going to get the data you need, and then the survey will be a waste of time. Because if you can't use the data from the survey that you're distributing, you've wasted your time. And you want to get the data you need the first time you run it. And that way, as you continue using that survey, you have longitudinal data to be able to compare trends and see the impact of your improvements, because you're assessing, you're making improvements, you're assessing again, and that trend continues. and you'll be able to see the impact of all of your efforts over time. So you want to make sure your questions are direct. You want to avoid those leading or biased questions. You want to avoid double-barreled questions. And what that means is that you want to avoid questions that ask two or more questions in one. For example, if we're going to continue with that advising question, you don't want to say, was it easy to get an appointment and were you satisfied with your advisor's service? That's two questions. Break that down. Was it easy to get an appointment? Maybe it wasn't easy to get an appointment, but the advisor service was good. The student will not know how to answer that question if it's two in one. Use a combination of open-ended and closed-ended questions. That's going to really help. If you start with those closed-ended questions and then lead into those open-ended questions, you'll get more robust data, and that's going to better help you drive your improvement actions. And you want to choose the appropriate response options. When I choose the appropriate response options, which I showed you on that Likert scale resource, which I'm going to share with all of you today. And then timing. This is something that's important. Especially for students, and if you're trying to determine the impact of service, people's memories are notoriously bad. We want to know if distribute the survey in a close time frame enough to be able to, for the students or the users or faculty or any customer, to be able to accurately answer the questions you're trying to ask. If a student's advising appointment is at the beginning of the semester and you don't survey them to the end of the following semester, they're going to forget that experience, and they're less likely to respond to that survey because they don't care about it anymore. So you think about the timing of when you distribute the survey is close enough to the event that you're trying to measure or that experience that you're trying to measure. And then know when to change your questions. Maybe some questions are irrelevant. Maybe you need to add questions. Depending on the context of what's going on, you might need to make those modifications. So always be aware that your questions are relevant and that you make those modifications if they need to be made. And then implement timely improvements. A lot of the time, sometimes people collect a lot of data and they don't act on it immediately. It's important to act on those data that you receive close to when you receive them, if it's feasible to act on it then. But you want to make sure that you're making those timely improvements so that people don't think, oh, well, I always fill out these surveys, but nothing ever changes. It's a waste of time. They don't do anything with this anyway. We want to make sure that if we're collecting data and we're getting this information from the populations that we're surveying, that we're acting on it, that we make sure that we have the resources and ask for the resources that we need to be able to act on those data to make those improvements, and that the improvements that we can make are manageable. So that's a little bit there for some tips. Always make sure that your questions are relevant, you're avoiding those biased questions, and that you're making sure the questions are direct and that you're administering the survey at an appropriate time. And some other key takeaways, which I already just covered most of them. Surveys are essential for your assessment toolkit. This is really going to drive your improvements. They can be very useful and they can be very relevant, and they can help you get the data you need to make those improvements that you're trying to make. And share your successes and challenges. That's important for your stakeholders to know. Not everything gets shared all the time, and if you share those successes, you share those challenges, you can get the feedback you need to make further improvements, and that your data tells a story. And using data visualizations can help tell that story. Outside of a report that goes to a VP, or outside of those internal reports that we do, visualizations and infographics can communicate our success, can communicate how great we're doing. And telling that story is important. It's important to our users, it's important to our FIU community, and we want to tell that story. And that's all we have for you today.
Okay, I got a question from Michelle. Michelle asked what is the best platform to make a word cloud PowerPoint? So there's several options that you can do, but what we use most often is a software that we get free from the Panther Tech. And it's called NVivo. NVivo allows you to import like data from open-ended questions, and it allows you to develop a word cloud. The reason why I like the software best is because there's many ways to modify the word cloud to be more reflective of what you really want to include. Like, for example, you can limit the words to the top 100 words used instead of having like 1,000 words. You can also eliminate certain words that might not be relevant. Like for our data, when we interview students, we eliminate the names that are frequently appearing, like the identification of the student's name, or things like that, or common words like a or the, things like that that aren't really relevant. Yes, those are called stop words, and you could modify it to be more reflective of important keywords that might be that might give your audience a better feel for the data you collected and for the sentiment of the students or the audience that you interviewed or that you collected open-ended questions from. But yes, like Susie said, there are several options. You can Google them online. Some of them don't have many options.
Yeah,
And
especially like those like free apps, they might not have many.
Yeah, so you don't have as much of a control. We can help with that as well. I do teach different people how to use NVivo. So if you're interested in doing those word clouds, you can definitely reach out to us and let us know.
Thank you. Could you put a link how to get to NVivo? I'm a new faculty here at the university.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
I'm working on it.
Sure.
So you'll have to make an account with Panther Tech. I'm putting it in here. And then you could just log in with your single sign-on, create an account, and then you could download it there.
Yeah, sometimes Panther Tech asks for a credit card number.
They don't anymore. They fixed their website.
Oh, they fixed it. Yay. Awesome.
Thank you.
Last week.
Yeah, they used to do it even for free software. They used to be like, oh, what's your credit card number? And then we would have to enter like a random credit card number, and then they would be like, okay.
A real credit card number.
Well, yeah, they have many different software options in Panther Tech. So if you're a new faculty member, you should check those out. If you like data analysis, SPSS is free there. So we always get the latest software from there, and they always are updating their groupings of free software we can download as faculty or staff. And so we can get SPSS for free. Through that same link that Susie put in there. You just look up all the software that they have. You could also call them. I'm not sure what their direct line is, but if you have any questions about any software offerings that they have, you can definitely reach out to them, and they could give you more direct instructions if you don't want to, if you get confused or you run into problems while you're using their online form.
And Qualtrics, I mentioned in the chat, but everybody didn't see it because of the word cloud question. When you create a survey in Qualtrics and you do your analysis on the reports, when you have your final, let me just show you. I'm terrible at this. So when you have your survey responses and you're looking for, you pull out your report. Let me see if I can grab one. It's loading very slow. But one of the options is a word cloud. So you have your survey here. And this is the survey that we gave to figure out that we needed sessions on this, because the people who responded to this survey mentioned it. So when you create a report, it takes some time to load when there's a lot of data. And I think Carmen has her hand raised. How can we help you, Carmen, while this is loading?
I think, I don't know if you're going to talk about it now, but I had a question about Qualtrics. If you do a survey before you do an intervention, and then you want to find out if the intervention was effective and you want to compare, is there an easy way to compare, to like tag who answered it before and who answered it after, so that you can make sure that it's the same kind of individual answering? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. And you can, you would need to use
It's a word cloud.
yeah, there's a word cloud, as Susie pointed out, but to answer your question, you would need to use, there's a feature on Qualtrics that allows you to select a mailing list group, and you can ask for some identifier. You could assign an identifier number to a particular person, and then ask them to submit that, use that same group, mailing group, I guess, to email them the pre and the post, if that makes sense. But having that same identifier to identify them, because it depends on
Qualtrics won't link it.
it depends, it won't link it, but it will give you the identifier for that particular respondent. And then you would have to extract the data. And when you extract the data, you can use a variety of software to link the two. If you're going to do a pre-post analysis, maybe you want to do a pair t-test as a statistical analysis, and then you can import the data to SPSS, or yeah, I typically use SPSS. You can use it in SAS or whatever other software application. You can even do it in Excel, but it's a lot more work to do. I wouldn't recommend Excel. It's just more cumbersome. And since we have SPSS free, so you can it's easier to use it in SPSS. And you can do a pair t-test and use that respondent identifier to link the pairs.
Okay. Thank
Excel
you.
has a data analysis toolkit add-on that you can download as an add-on to Excel, and it's super easy to use, and it can help you. You can run simple t-tests.
Yeah, we can help with that too. By the way, we have a whole bunch of educational researchers in our team, and we have Sarah, who's a data expert. So if you want us to help you with designing something like that, a mechanism, not just the survey itself, but also the methodology for analysis, so we could do that too.
Yeah, we can help with that.
Thank you. That's good to know.
Yeah.
So in Qualtrics, just some of the visualizations, since we're on the topic of visualization, that you can do when you're creating that report. If you click insert, you have visualization here, and these are all the different types of visualizations that it comes out with. You could do a table, a statistics table. Let me show, I'll scroll up it a little bit, but it also has like heat maps and word clouds. So you can do these types of visualizations are native in Qualtrics. And up here, you can see how they come out. So the horizontal bar charts, as Sarah was saying, are really great for those categorical variables when you want to see the number of responses in a certain Likert scale category. If you want to see, it's taking forever to load. Sorry that the internet is not being friendly today. So how what the pie chart comes out with, and you can customize the colors and everything in Qualtrics. So the Qualtrics report is really useful when analyzing your survey data to create that report. It even will pop out with a statistical table based off of, all right, these are all of the factors that you were measuring in this question. It'll give you the minimum scores, the maximum scores, the means, standard deviations, the variance in your responses, the ends, and the sum of responses, which is not really helpful here, but it's there. But it gives you those metrics there. And then you can also see a frequency table of that as well. And that comes out in Qualtrics without anything additional. And without you having to do anything, it's just a click of a button.
Yeah, and for those people who have repeating report, repeating surveys they need to send out, for example, every semester, you can create the report template one time and then use data, like date parameters, to be able to delineate cutoff times in which you want the report to reflect the data that you collect. So that way, if you identify it by semester, you know that anyone who responded within that semester will be a different group than perhaps the time frame in which you submitted you distributed the survey for the previous semester. So that's very helpful to eliminate some of the workload of creating these types of reports. You only create the report once the way you like it. And then all you have to do is, going forward, define the population or by the time frame or whatever other variable you're using, and then customize the report like that.
So yeah, this is just one example of how you can use Qualtrics to compile and complete your survey, complete a report for your data for a survey on multiple factors. You can, I'm just showing a visual, a quick scroll through our survey. That's it.
Any other questions? Okay, I don't see any more questions. If that's the case, then we're here for you. We are your resource as always, and not just for surveys but for other tools as well. And if you need us to, you know where to reach out to us, and we're always here for you. Let us know if you need any help going forward. If that's all, yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for everything. It's been a pleasure to present to you, and we hope to see you in future Symposia sessions or workshops. Bye, everyone.
Bye. And I'll send a recording of this presentation. It'll be posted on our YouTube. And then to everybody who registered, I'll also send the Likert scale resource and the PowerPoint slides.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you very much.